The movement that is fundamentally anti-democratic at its core. If you really dig into the ideology, it really wants something different, an autocracy. And Trump is a leader, perfect leader for an autocratic movement because he doesn't follow the rules. He breaks the law. He's like moving the goalposts and moving them again and moving again. They're often referring to him like a King Cyrus or King David. They're not just going to destroy the social fabric. How is the stock market doing with these needless trade wars? They're going to raise the price of goods for everybody. They're destroying the international relations that have led to a measure of post-war stability. I mean, obviously not perfectly, but at least has sort of served in America's interests. They're destroying America's institutions. Trump is turning the Department of Justice into his own personal mob service. They're destroying consumer protection agencies. They're destroying Medicare. They're destroying institutions that Americans actually need and want.
Okay, welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us today is a New York Times best-selling author, Katherine Stewart. The title of the book is Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. What a killer book this is. And first of all, thank you for coming on. But secondarily, I was moved by your book. And so, your book scared me, and I'm going to tell you why it scared me. There's more people every year that want to be the people that you're writing about, Katherine. Meaning, if I said to you, the rate of change, the slope, is for more intolerance as opposed to more tolerance. And they're also smart. They're smart. They're doing what the Republicans did with Operation Red Map. You know, they're figuring out a way to legally infiltrate their message. React to that. Am I wrong? Tell me.
You're absolutely right. I mean, in many instances, they're using the tools of democracy to destroy democracy, but they're also using tactics that I think are frankly craven, like the spread of misinformation. I mean, this is the key to so much of the story. That's why I put the word lies right in the center of the title of my book. If you can separate a certain number of people from the facts, it makes them so much easier to control. But there is more to it than that. This is a movement that is fundamentally anti-democratic at its core. If you really dig into the ideology, as I've done in my 3 books on this topic, and especially in Money, Lies, and God, you can see that this is a movement that doesn't believe in democracy. It really wants something different, an autocracy. And Trump is a leader, perfect leader for an autocratic movement because he doesn't follow the rules. He breaks the law. He's like moving the goalposts and moving them again and moving again. Pretty sure soon they're not even on the playing field. And, they're often referring to him like a King Cyrus or King David.
But trust me, that's what he wants. That's why a lot of us who love democracy and love the frailty of human beings, ourselves included, and accept that frailty, don't want that. We know that always ends in terror. But let me just ask you this, because I'm fascinated by the book. I know the answer, but because I read your book, but I want you to tell the people that are listening. Give me the utopia for them. So come down with the tablets and tell me what the perfect America is for the Money, Lies, and God group of people. What does it look like?
It's interesting. The movement seems to emphasize a return to some kind of imaginary version of an allegedly better past, a past that includes element of a regressive social order, such as gender hierarchy, the suppression of certain forms of speech, attacks on religious freedom of those who don't conform, among other features. It's a kind of vision that never really existed the way that they think it did. So, what is this, an America made great again? It's funny because when they talk about the past, the elements of the past that they really like, often they'll hearken back to the good old days of the 1950s. Well, let's think about what was happening in the 1950s. Tax rate at the top was a lot higher than it is today. The average CEO in America could have a very nice standard of living, but they weren't making many hundreds of times the amount of their average worker, that's people actually living in America and working. So, they're sort of hearkening back to a fictitious fantasy, an unrealistic fantasy about a golden age of yore. And I think of these folks as nihilists because their vision is really not based on reality. It's based on, it's like retreating into a fantasy that is projected onto the past.
All right. There are 5 groups in this book. There are funders. There are thinkers. There are sergeants. There are power players. And there are foot soldiers. So let's go through each one of them, okay? Tell me what a funder is.
So in this group, I pay a lot of attention to funders. There are a lot of very wealthy people in America, but only a sector are funding this movement. So, a lot of wealthy people really believe in democracy and are trying to defend it. But there is a sector of extremely wealthy oligarchs, I would call them, because there's been this sort of massive concentration of wealth over the last decades at the tippy top of the economic spectrum. And they are investing in anti-democratic projects. I mean, I'm talking about people like, just to name a few names, Barry Seid or the Corkerys or Sean Filer or Tim Dunn or the Wilkes brothers or the DeVos Prince family juggernaut. Here's the thing about these folks. Some of them are evangelicals, some are Protestant, some are Catholic, some are Jewish, some are frankly atheistic. But they all agree that, I think they tend to be more motivated by economic reasons than cultural reasons. Some of them are more culturally motivated than others, but some of them really don't seem to care at all about the culture wars that they're helping to fund. Because the culture wars are really just the shiny baubles to get the little people on board, right? They want no regulation for their businesses, especially if they're in environmentally sort of businesses that are involved in any kind of environmental exploitation, degradation. They want lower taxes for the rich. They say they believe, some of them, in free markets. They just want capitalism and let the markets do their thing. At the same time, they want protective policies for their monopolistic businesses. They want privileged government contracts, and they want tax breaks. I'm looking at you, Elon Musk. So I think a lot of them, some of them are really motivated by cultural reasons too. They think we need to keep an unruly public in line with religion, but some of them just see the religious nationalism as the cost of doing business, right? Then I think about the thinkers, many of whom are associated with the New Right, a movement that's, I would say, less explicitly Christian nationalist and more explicitly anti-democratic. Some of them actually derive key ideas from Nazis, like the Nazi political theorist Carl Schmitt, who came up with this idea of what I would call this permanent state of emergency. We're in an apocalyptic threat, because of liberalism and pluralism, and so the rules don't apply. We need a strong man who's going to take care of it for us. It's really kind of a disgraceful idea, very anti-democratic. Then I also pay a lot of attention to the sergeants, who are these very sort of political pastors who play a really important role in turning out congregations to vote for anti-democratic candidates. And I pay a lot of attention to the power players, the sort of high-level strategists, people like Ralph Reed, and I would call Charlie Kirk now a high-level strategist, or Bob McEwen of the Council for National Policy. They are sort of directing the infrastructure of this movement. And finally, the foot soldiers. And again, a lot of these people, it's a very large, diverse group, ethnically diverse, frankly, religiously diverse too. And a lot of them have, to some degree, I would say, you've got a lot of evangelicals, white evangelicals, very reliable, but the movement is drawing new energy from a sector of like Pentecostal and charismatic movements, which are both multiracial and transnational movements, and also easily given over to sort of hard right politics. And they've got a lot of different interests and ideas. When you peel away some of the culture war stuff, they generally want a better deal for themselves and for the workforce. but they're manipulated by movement leaders to vote for these culture wars that get them on board with the larger anti-democratic agenda. They're not just going to destroy the social fabric. They're going to destroy the economy. They're going to destroy they are destroying. I mean, how is the stock market doing with these needless trade wars? They're going to raise the price of goods for everybody. Think about they're destroying the international relations that have, led to a measure of post-war stability. Obviously not perfectly, but at least has sort of served in America's interests and led to certain kinds of non-nuclear, non-proliferation agreements. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, they're destroying America's institutions. Trump is turning the Department of Justice into his own personal mob service. They're destroying consumer protection agencies. They're destroying, Medicare. They're destroying institutions that Americans actually need and want. They're, keen on eliminating public education in the way that we know of it. I think that this movement is fundamentally nihilistic. Their aim is to destroy rather than to create. By their actions rather than their actual words. For all of their religion talk, they're denying that there's any real value or truth in this world. They see the idea of truth as just another casualty in a political war. They don't mind spreading lies. I actually think it's really important to pay attention. I've, written my 3 books to try to warn people about this. What we're seeing, especially I think in the international realm, follows a classic pattern with the rise of authoritarian leaders. They need to channel their aggression and rage, and the rage of their constituents on others. So, authoritarians have a long history of engaging in futile expansionist projects and declaring war with people who were formerly friendly neighbors. So, when we look at what's happening to the NATO alliance, to Canada, Greenland, they're falling victim to the same malevolent forces that are already attacking American democracy. And this is a movement that, I think right now we're seeing in the Trump administration the sort of big moves that are more sort of a consequence of new right ideology. I think they're laying the groundwork for the sort of Christian nationalist agenda, which will be coming next. This is a movement that worships power. They worship power. That's why
and they want it.
They want power. They want power.
They crave it.
They crave it. Okay. Yeah. I think about the new alliances that Trump seems to be drawn to. An alliance. There was, I think, a piece very recently that showed he's more allied in terms of his ideas of leadership with Russia and Turkey. And you look at the way Russia and Turkey exploit religion for politics and power. You could describe their countries as theocratic in a certain fake sense, and that there's an official religion and, or Iran. Let's look at Iran. Their laws are based on their holy texts, supposedly, a certain interpretation of them. But they're more accurately described as cronyist kleptocracies with absolute suppression of free speech and no tolerance for political opposition. And that's, I believe, what it could be headed to if the majority of us sort of democracy-loving folks don't step up.
Okay, and that great irony in your book is that the democracy has allowed these people to have this movement. The democracy has allowed these people to be who they are, and as a result of which they want to take that away from other people. And that's one of the big messages that you put into this book, which I really greatly admire. So I really appreciate you joining us. The title of the book is Money, Lies, and God.
Anthony Scaramucci, welcome to our show. Thank you for making the time.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
How dangerous is this moment in time after 7 weeks of Donald Trump in office?
Well, I think it's very dangerous on a number of different reasons, because he is ripping up the post-World War II order. He wants to do things to the United States from an economic perspective that are not realistic. And they're moving in a way that doesn't understand that everything is interconnected. You know, if they think of the economy like your body, if we're operating on a certain part of your body, it does have stress and impact on other parts of your body. And so what he's doing with the tariffs, as an example, is going to hurt the country. It's going to hurt lower and middle income people. It's a regressive form of taxation, or to quote Warren Buffett, in addition to being a regressive form of taxation, it's an act of war.
So Prime Minister Trudeau in Canada said he means it. He means when he says that Canada should be the 51st state of the United States. Do you think that Donald Trump has a serious plan to take over Canada, for example?
I think you have to take him seriously. I'm not one of these people that pretends otherwise. You know, I think what happens to people is you say something like, well, he's going to take Greenland, to use his own quote that he gave in a speech last night, one way or another, I'm taking Greenland. So if you're, I don't know, if you're observing that, you'd have to say, well, what does he mean by that? That could mean some type of military intervention in Greenland. He's decapitated different areas of the government and installed people that are incredibly loyal to him and not necessarily competent in their jobs, but they're serious yes men or serious yes women as it relates to him. So you just have to tell me how deep that goes and how far it goes. So I think you have to take him seriously. I think you have to take a position that there's a middle, there's no, for me, there were three views when he started. When you interviewed me in November, there were three views. One was an optimistic view, one was a middle of the road view, and one was an apocalyptic view. The optimistic view is off the table. He's made that very clear. He wants to disengage the United States from its allies. He wants to side with people like Vladimir Putin. He wants to create a sphere of influence for the United States. It's very different than it was from the Second World War to today. And I think when you're listening to him, I think he's telling you, I want to control Canada. I want to control Greenland, because we can make an argument that's part of North America. And I will likely want to have a big say and big influence in the Western hemisphere of the world. As it relates to these other areas of the world, let's let Vladimir Putin have his say in his part of Eurasia and his say as it relates to Eastern Europe. And let's take it to an extreme just so we can understand the danger. And then China, that would be okay for Taiwan, and even at some point, possibly Australia. You can control that area of the world.
But this is apocalyptic, what you're describing now.
Well, that's the apocalyptic view. What Trump is doing is un-American, and I would make one more statement. I think it's an important statement. The most un-American thing I have seen him do in the last 7 weeks is the berating and the rebuking of President Zelensky in the Oval Office. And so let me just set the scene for you. I'm living in a homeowners association. I live in the mansion. You have a smaller house down the block. There's an arsonist setting your house on fire. You call me and you say, I need help. Can you pass me your garden hose? I got to put that fire out in the house, and we've got to stop the arsonist because he's going to set other houses on fire. I invite you into my living room to discuss this with you, and then I berate you in front of the national and international television. So that to me is the most un-American thing that you could do. He said something about cards. You don't have the cards. He's trying to flip the card table over, and he's trying to restate the rules of the road. And this is not American as defined by the 250-year history of America. And we have to explain that. We have to rebut him, and we have to try to convince the American people that this is the wrong way to go as it relates to a vision of America.
Is this gangster rule coming out of the Oval Office? And also, is it inspired or even dictated by President Putin in Moscow?
If I were Vladimir Putin, what would I want in the first 7 weeks of an American presidency? Well, I would give Donald Trump a grade of 100% if I was coming out of the Kremlin. But I think Trump is actually worrying the Russians as well, by the way. I'll give you something counterintuitive and contrarian to think about. he's so unpredictable, and he's running the thing with an element of reality television. And of course, when you're in a reality television show, you set up conflict. And so he's been running a studio out of the Oval Office where he's taking unending questions from journalists, and he's got Keir Starmer in there trying to be lovey-dovey, and Macron trying to be trying to be lovey-dovey, and then he's there to he put Zelensky in a crossfire, and he ambushed Zelensky. That was a total ambush.
It was a plan.
No question. No question. Yeah, they want to weaken Zelensky. So
do they want to weaken him or get him out of office? Do they want to
weaken him and eventually get him out of office? I mean, Putin has told people he wants Zelensky out of office. Zelensky turned out to be a way tougher character. Let's not revise history. February of 2022, the expectation was that Putin, to use Zelensky's word, 3 days he'd be in Kiev, and Zelensky would have sought exile somewhere. But you have to think about the history here. You have to think about the history of Ukraine, the history of Russia. You have to think about the 1994 agreement to give up the nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and you have to think about the West's commitment to the security of Ukraine. And then again, you have to think about the American people over the last 80 years. What was the message from American presidents to this continent over the last 80 years? We are here to protect you. We are here to put down the internecine conflicts. We are here as a security umbrella alongside of our counterparts in NATO to provide space for the free world.
Did it end now?
He wants to end it. You see, I actually think Donald Trump has done something that will take maybe even a generation to repair, because if I'm a European leader and I trusted the United States, the security umbrella of the United States, the vision that the United States had for the free world, and you've now put a leader in place that doesn't want that, that means there's a lot of people inside the United States that don't understand the positive benefits of that policy for themselves in the United States.
Is it wise for Europe to kiss up to Donald Trump, like Starmer and Macron, and also the Secretary General of the NATO are doing at this time, to get Zelensky back into the Oval Office and make a deal?
I don't think so, and I don't even think it matters. I mean, it will matter for that press cycle. I'm sure Prime Minister Starmer's popularity went up. He handled himself deftly. President Macron handled himself deftly, but I don't really think it matters. There's a very broad agenda that Trump and his administration have, President Trump and his administration, and so therefore it doesn't really matter. I think the Europeans would be better at becoming more independent from the United States and more integrated with each other. And I think that if you want to hurt Donald Trump, diminish the influence of the United States on this continent, because you'll send a message to people in the United States that they are not as needed as they once were. And I think that integration has really helped the United States.
In November, in our interview, you called Trump a fascist. Would you repeat that word today?
Well, you tell me. He won't call him a fascist, but I know he's a fascist. And just go through what he's doing. But I also know him behind the scenes. I know that he wants uniformity of applause when he walks on a stage. I know he wants zero dissent. A good political leader that believes in a democracy wants dissent. They want the argument. Okay, the founding fathers that put that document together, sir, they wanted the compromise. They wanted the inertia of the government. They wanted to prevent a tyranny.
And he doesn't.
He definitely does not. And by the way, take a look at what he's doing. You tell me, am I closer to the truth 7 weeks into his presidency than I was in November? I know the guy. I know what he's capable of, and I know the people that are organized with him now. The people that he was organized with in the first term were not that.
You were one of them.
I was one of them.
Do you regret it that you were working for him?
Of course. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I think, I think it helped me. I think me working for him and me getting famously fired like that gave me a platform to explain the danger of him.
So the people who
I
are working
regret
with
it,
him
but I
now,
also think there's a silver lining to it.
yeah, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, the people who are working with him now, are they more dangerous than the people he worked with in his first presidency?
Way more dangerous.
What would be your advice to the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who now has to deal with Trump and basically told Zelensky, make peace with Trump. You made a little mistake there, go back and make a peace deal.
Well, I think that's good advice in the short term, but I think he has to have a two-pronged strategy. Strategy number one is he's got to get with his contemporaries in NATO, the people that are part of the alliance, and say that there's a chance here over a 4-year period, if not longer, that we may have to go it alone without the United States.
How dangerous is it for you to speak out on all these topics?
I think it's dangerous. I think if I were a politician, it would be extremely dangerous. I think I'm a political commentator, and so there's still space for me in the country. But listen, he's creating a chilling effect on free speech in our country, which is great irony because he has J.D. Vance giving a speech at the Munich Security Conference deriding the free speech laws in Europe, most of Europe. And yet in the United States, they're having a chilling effect on free speech. So yeah, it's dangerous.
Are there,
I don't care, though.
You don't care. Are there personal threats to your life in the U.S.?
There have been, yes.
Do you have any protection?
I do.
Yeah. The new director of the FBI, Patel, he's not a friend of yours. You're on his hit list, basically.
Yeah, I'm moving up the list. Biden kept pardoning everybody, so he's... through the pardons, I've probably gone up the list.
But it's not a laughing matter, is it? Because do you get any protection of the FBI if you need it?
No, unfortunately, all of that stuff has gone away, but
since President Trump is in office.
Yeah, I think he took Esper's. I didn't have a detail, but I think the relationships with the FBI are going to be altered by Kash Patel. But all of the details of people that spoke out against Donald Trump have been removed. And so that's never happened before, by the way.
Anthony Fauci,
Anthony Fauci, Mark
doctor,
Esper.
Yeah. When you worked with him in 2015 and 16, could you have ever imagined that this would be the outcome, that the president, that Donald Trump would develop like he is now?
No, I didn't see it. I mean, there are other people, if people want to be critical of me, they say, well, he had these types of tendencies, you should have seen it, and this is a stain on your legacy that you worked with him. I have to accept that, but I didn't see it. And remember, this is a guy that went to Elton John's wedding. This is a guy that started out as a Democrat. This is a guy that was pro-choice as it related to the abortion issue in the United States.
Why do people, billionaires, very powerful people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon and Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, now come back to Trump while they were very critical and now work with him, give him money, and want to be his best friend?
Well, look at the Krupp family in Nazi Germany. Look at the different families. When you have that level of wealth, and you have a tendency to be transactional, less principled, and those people are making a decision. They've got great lives and great yachts and great footprints of wealth, and they don't want their companies broken up by the Department of Justice through antitrust, and they don't want their families threatened. And so they've made a decision of capitulation to him. Bezos has taken it very far. He had a tagline on the Washington Post, "The democracy dies in darkness." He's now switched the editorial programming of the Washington Post to be right-leaning. So I think they've done this to protect themselves, and I think it's an expedient thing to do, but it's understandable. I'm not sitting here criticizing them. You have to make a decision in a situation like this. Are you going to stick to your principles and you're going to explain what is actually going on and see if you can stop what is going on, or you can capitulate to it? And I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, blue-collar family members. My dad served in the U.S. Army. My two uncles fought in the Second World War. And I think it's just very important. I've lived an amazing life. I've lived an undeserved life in America. I've lived many aspects of the American dream, became financially independent, had an opportunity to work in the White House, and I love my country. And I love the principles that this country has abided by over the last 80 years. And I think it's important to re-articulate those principles, restate those principles to people, even if it creates some level of personal danger, or even if it creates some level of retribution from the American president. Think about how un-American that is. He's a very dangerous guy, and we gotta tell people why, so that we can stop him.
Anthony Scaramucci, it's not a nice message that you're bringing here, but thank you very much for coming to Buitenhof.
Well, I mean, we got to be optimistic. I mean, we have to talk about this to prevent it from happening.